You just blinked and somehow a whole year disappeared. Summer felt like it lasted a week. Your 20s feel like a blur you can barely reconstruct. Your childhood, though, that stretches on forever in your memory. Every single day distinct, it feels like time itself is speeding up. It feels like biology, like the clock in your head is somehow running faster now than it did when you were 7. But the real answer is far stranger, and it has nothing to do with clocks at all, and everything to do with how your brain decides what a memory is even worth. Picture yourself at 6 years old, waiting for your birthday. A single week felt endless. You checked the calendar every morning like it might have changed overnight. Now picture yourself waiting for your next birthday today. A week disappears in what feels like an afternoon. Nothing about the actual passage of time changed. The sun still takes 24 hours to circle back. So what changed? Let's start with a number. In 1897, a French philosopher named Paul Janet proposed something almost too simple to be taken seriously. He suggested that we don't experience time in absolute units at all. We experience it proportionally, as a fraction of the total life we've lived so far. Think about what that actually means. For a 5-year-old, 1 year is 20% of their entire conscious existence. It's enormous. It's practically a fifth of everything they've ever known. For a 50-year-old, that same year is 2%, a rounding error, a blip against the total weight of everything that came before it. Janet never had brain scanners or memory labs. He was working with pure logic, more than a century before neuroscience could test it. And yet modern researchers keep circling back to his idea, because the math lines up disturbingly well with how time actually feels. Here's where it gets stranger, though. Proportional time alone can't be the full story. Because if it were, the shift should feel smooth, gradual, a steady curve from childhood to old age. That's not what people report. Most people describe something closer to a cliff, childhood crawls. Then somewhere in your 20s or 30s, time seems to lurch forward and never slow back down. Why a cliff and not a curve? This is where a psychologist named Peter Mangan enters the story. In the late 1990s, Mangan, working at the University of Vermont, ran a study asking people of different ages to silently estimate when 3 minutes had passed. Without watching a clock, his subjects under 25 were remarkably accurate. 3 minutes felt like 3 minutes, but his older subjects, especially those over 60, consistently let far more real time slip by before they guessed the 3 minutes were up. In their heads, 3 minutes still felt like 3 minutes. In reality, it had stretched to 3 minutes and 40 seconds, sometimes longer. Their internal clock, whatever that clock actually is, had genuinely slowed its ticking relative to the world outside. Mangan's data suggested something unsettling. This isn't only a trick of memory looking backward. It's happening in real time in the present moment as your brain tries to track the world as it unfolds. So now you have two separate effects working together. Janet's proportional shrinking of each year against your total life, and Mangan's slowing internal clock, quietly recalibrating how long a given stretch of the present actually feels while it's happening. But even both of those combined still don't fully explain the cliff. For that, you need to look at something your brain does every single day without asking your permission: encoding. Here's an experiment worth trying in your own head right now. Try to recall last Tuesday. What did you do? For most adults, unless something unusual happened, last Tuesday is already gone, folded into a grey blur of every other Tuesday that came before it. Now try to recall a random Tuesday from when you were 11 years old. If anything memorable happened that day, even something small, there's a real chance you can still find it. Vivid, detailed, oddly specific. Neuroscientists call this the reminiscence bump, and it shows up again and again in memory research. People asked to recall significant life memories at any age tend to pull a disproportionate number of them from adolescence and early adulthood, roughly ages 10 through 30. The reason traces back to novelty. Your brain isn't a video recorder running at a constant frame rate. It's closer to a highlight reel, and the footage that makes the cut is footage the brain judged worth keeping. Because it was new, surprising, or emotionally charged. Childhood is a non-stop parade of firsts. First day of school, first bike ride without training wheels, first heartbreak, first job. Each one gets tagged as significant, and each tag becomes a dense, richly detailed memory your brain can later use as a landmark. Adulthood, for most people, becomes routine. The same commute, the same rooms, the same faces across the same table. Your brain, sensibly, stops flagging most of it as worth the storage space. And a life with fewer flagged memories, looking backward, simply feels like it contained less time. This is the trick hiding underneath the whole illusion. You're not actually measuring how much time passed. You're measuring how many distinct memories you can find sitting inside that stretch of time. Fewer memories, shorter feeling years. More memories, longer feeling years. Even if the clock on the wall ran identically in both. There's a name for this pattern in memory research too. Psychologists call it the holiday paradox, and a British researcher named Claudia Hammond spent years studying exactly why it happens. Hammond found that a period of new experience feels slow while you're inside it, because your brain is working overtime processing unfamiliar input, but feels fast in the rearview mirror, because there was so little routine to compress against. An ordinary week does the opposite. It feels fast while you're living it, because your brain barely has to work to process anything, everything is already familiar. But looking back, that same week feels almost instantaneous because there's nothing distinct in it for your memory to grab onto. Hold both of those side by side, and something clicks into place. The strange sinking feeling of a year vanishing isn't really about the year at all. It's about your memory of it, assembled after the fact, out of however many distinct flags your brain managed to plant along the way. There's a researcher whose work makes this especially vivid, a psychologist named William Friedman, who spent decades studying how children and adults understand time differently at a conceptual level. Friedman's studies found that young children genuinely don't organize time the way adults do. They don't yet have a fully built mental timeline stretching smoothly from past to future. Instead, children experience time more like a collection of loosely connected moments, each one large and present, because there's so little else yet filling the space around it. As the timeline fills in with more life, more routine, more repetition, the individual moments start to compress against each other. The way small print looks larger on an empty page than the same size print crammed onto a busy one. There's a biological layer underneath all of this too, one tied to a chemical you already know well, dopamine. Your brain releases it in small bursts whenever it encounters something unexpected, something outside the pattern it was predicting. That burst does more than make novelty feel good. It appears to sharpen encoding, helping the brain decide almost instantly that whatever just happened is worth filing away in detail rather than letting it dissolve into the background noise of an ordinary day. A first kiss gets a dopamine tag. A 400th commute does not. Childhood runs on a nearly constant drip of these unexpected moments, simply because so little of the world has been categorized yet. Every texture, every face, every rule of the game is still being learned for the first time. Adulthood, once the map of daily life is fully drawn, stops delivering that drip nearly as often unless you go looking for it on purpose, which brings up an uncomfortable but fascinating possibility. What if the speeding up of time isn't really about aging at all? What if it's about the ratio between novelty and routine, something that has almost nothing to do with your birthday and everything to do with how you're choosing to live? Here's a detail that tends to catch people off guard. Ask anyone who has just returned from 2 weeks backpacking through an unfamiliar country, hiking new trails, eating unfamiliar food, sleeping in a different bed every few nights, how long the trip felt while they were living it, and then how long it feels in memory looking back. While it was happening, the days often felt long, sometimes even slow, packed as they were with new information the brain had to actively process. But looking back weeks later, that same 2-week trip tends to feel enormous, disproportionately large compared to 2 ordinary weeks at home, precisely because it left behind so many distinct, retrievable memories. Meanwhile, 2 weeks of an unremarkable routine, wake up, commute, work, dinner, sleep, repeat, tend to compress into something that feels like it barely happened at all, even though the clock ran for exactly the same number of hours. A neuroscientist named David Eagleman went looking for proof of this in one of the strangest experiments ever run on human time perception. Eagleman, working at Baylor College of Medicine, recruited volunteers willing to fall backward from a high platform into a safety net, wearing a special wrist device that flashed numbers too fast for the eye to normally read. His hypothesis was simple. If fear and novelty genuinely slow down subjective time, as so many people claim after a car accident or a near miss, then during the fall, his volunteers should be able to read numbers that would otherwise flash by too quickly to register, They couldn't. Their perception hadn't actually sped up in real time. But every single one of them afterward reported that the fall had felt like it lasted far longer than the roughly 1 second it actually took. Eagleman's conclusion reshaped how researchers think about this entire subject. The slowdown isn't happening during the event at all. It's happening afterward in memory. A terrifying novel. 3-second fall gets encoded so densely, with so much detail, that recalling it later feels like recalling something that must have taken much longer than it did. That single finding connects every thread in this story. Time doesn't stretch or shrink while it's happening. Your memory of it does, built entirely out of how much distinct detail your brain decided was worth keeping. A packed novel 3 seconds can outweigh in memory an uneventful 3 hours. This is where a physicist named Adrian Bajan offers a slightly different angle on the same mystery. Bajan, working at Duke University, proposed that part of the slowdown in subjective time isn't purely psychological. It's physical, tied to the actual speed at which your brain and eyes process incoming visual information. His research suggested that as the body ages, the rate at which the brain can process new images slows down, meaning fewer distinct mental frames get captured per unit of real time. Fewer frames per second, in a sense, means each real second contains less perceived content, and less perceived content reads retrospectively as a shorter stretch of time. Whether you lean toward Janet's proportional math, Mangan's slowing internal clock, Friedman's shifting timeline structure, or Bajan's frame rate theory, they all point toward the same underlying mechanism from different directions. Time doesn't actually speed up. Your brain's method of measuring it changes quietly, continuously, almost entirely without your awareness. And here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. This means the sensation isn't fixed. It isn't a fact of biology you're simply forced to accept, the way you accept grey hair or reading glasses. It's closer to a side effect of habit, and habits can be interrupted. People who deliberately introduce novelty into adulthood, learning an instrument for the first time, moving to an unfamiliar city, taking a different route to work, picking up a skill that demands full attention, often report something that sounds almost impossible. Their years start to slow back down, not because the calendar changes, but because their brain starts flagging more of each year as worth remembering again. This is why milestone years so often feel strangely long in hindsight. A year with a wedding, a new job, a move, a birth, a loss, tends to feel expansive when you look back on it, dense with distinct memory, even while the 12 months leading up to it seem to vanish in a haze. Contrast that with a year spent entirely on autopilot. Same job, same apartment, same weekend patterns week after week. When you try to recall it later, it often collapses into a single blurry impression, even though you lived through every single one of its days. There's a strange comfort hiding in this. It means the years don't have to keep accelerating simply because you're getting older. What actually accelerates is repetition, and repetition is at least partially a choice. Think about how modern life is structured, almost engineered for repetition. The same apps open in the same order every morning. The same 15 restaurants on rotation. The same algorithm quietly feeding you more of whatever you already liked yesterday, trimming away exactly the kind of unpredictability your brain relies on to mark a moment as memorable. It's a strange irony. The tools built to make daily life easier, smoother, more frictionless, may also be the tools quietly speeding up how fast your years seem to disappear. Friction, unpredictability, the mildly annoying task of navigating something new, might be doing more to slow your internal clock than any supplement or trick ever could. Some researchers have pointed to something almost poetic in how children experience the exact opposite of this. Every meal is new to a toddler because they haven't built the category yet. Every street is new because they haven't walked it 50 times. Their world resists compression by default, simply because so little of it has been sorted and filed away as already known. Yours resists compression far less, not because your brain has gotten worse at its job, but because it has gotten extremely good at recognizing what it can safely ignore. You can actually catch this mechanism working in miniature inside a single ordinary day. A dull meeting, one where nothing new gets said, one you've essentially sat through 100 times before, seems to crawl while you're stuck in it, and then evaporates from memory within the hour. You couldn't tell someone what was discussed if your job depended on it. Compare that to the one afternoon at work when something actually went wrong, an unexpected problem, a genuine surprise nobody saw coming. That afternoon also felt long while it was happening, but unlike the meeting, it stays. Months later, you can still describe it in detail because your brain flagged it the moment it broke from the pattern. Zoom out from a single afternoon to an entire season, and the same rule scales up perfectly. A summer defined by nothing but the same pool, the same friends, the same backyard. Technically still contains 92 individual days. But looking back, it often collapses into a single soft memory. More feeling than timeline. A summer that included a move, a breakup, a new job, a trip somewhere unfamiliar. Holds its full 92 days intact in memory. Distinct and separable, each one earning its place. Same length on the calendar. Wildly different length in the mind that has to store it. Think back to that 6-year-old checking the calendar, convinced the birthday would never arrive. Their week wasn't actually longer than yours. It just contained more firsts, more surprises, more raw material for a brain that was still deciding what counted as memorable. You can't return to being 6, but you can return to being someone whose brain has something new to flag. The next unfamiliar street, the next skill half-learned, the next ordinary Tuesday, turned into something worth remembering, still sitting there waiting for you to notice it. You just blinked, and somehow a whole year disappeared. But maybe it isn't the year that vanished. Maybe it's simply the moments inside it you never gave your brain a reason to keep.